In our next chapter, we are going to touch Liferay DXP for the first time. Well, you might have started a Liferay CE container before, but now we're actually going into the matter of this course. We're going to discuss what makes up a simple Liferay stack. We are going to deploy Liferay on two different environments. That is, one a web container that will be Tomcat, and then one full profile application server. And as we deliver this material to you, we're going to go for the open source container that we can freely distribute, and there we're going to use Wildfly. Then we're going to inspect and explore the components, as it says here, that make up a Liferay environment. That is everything we need to run this installation. We're going to discuss the JNDI connections, that is typically the database and the mail server. And then we're also covering a little bit about implementing Liferay in the cloud, even though I'd rather put that further to the end when we have done a little bit more, specifically the cluster. When that cluster has been set up, then I'd like to talk about the cloud in more details. So, at the end of this chapter, we will have seen Liferay running on a Tomcat server, we will have seen it on a Wildfly server, and we will have discussed and configured the JNDI sections, which are typically the connections to the database as well as to a mail server. Prerequisites: you probably have followed the previous chapters and installed Docker. We'll need all of that, and we'll need the downloaded files, which have been made available close to one of the other videos or the other exercises. You should have downloaded that. Just inspect the section on the right side of the video where you will find the download files that we need for all of the Docker images that we're now going to build. Okay, how do we set up a Liferay environment? We need a couple of components in the environment. That is, for one, which one do you take? Liferay is platform agnostic. It runs on a variety of application servers. It runs on a variety of databases and other environments like an operating system, Java, JDKs, and so on. We have many different options. We can run, let me go through the variations right now, or at least a couple of them. Some of the application servers that we can run on are just random application servers, are just the classic application servers: WebSphere, application server, WebLogic, JBoss, Wildfly, or we can run on a simple servlet container, or we can run on a servlet container like Tomcat. So we don't need all of the infrastructure of an application server. We can just run on a servlet container. Which one should you run on? Well, there's one answer to that, and it didn't change over the years. There's one application server that I'm recommending that you should run on, which is the one that you or your team have the most experience in setting up, or especially in restoring, in disaster recovery. If I tell you run on this environment, but you have no clue how to disaster recover it, but you have lots of experience in a different environment, there's no point in following my suggestion. You better run with the one environment that you know how to operate. Same goes for the database. MySQL, Oracle, there will be a slide later on listing a couple of the databases that Liferay DXP runs on and is certified on and which are supported. But which one should you run? Take the one that you know how to operate, how to have a backup. That makes most sense. If I tell you MySQL runs well, but you know how to run Oracle, it doesn't help you if you then run on MySQL, but you have no clue how to recover. Okay, with that, we'll run Liferay on the first environment, and I'll have the decision for you. Our first environment will be a Tomcat server. Web container, in this case, so that's the servlet container. The web container is the lightweight option, and the full profile application server with all of the Java EE infrastructure will be our secondary choice. And here we have a tiny overview. What's that? Well, we'll have both options. We'll run either in the web portion of an application server or on the web profile server. And here's the list of the databases that I have mentioned. There's DB2, there's MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, Oracle, SQL Server, and this list is not complete. There are a couple of derivatives of these databases that are running in the various cloud environments, and they work as well. Now be careful, there is a compatibility matrix for Liferay DXP, where we definitely state this is the environment we run on, and it contains some version numbers. Now these version numbers are in flux. It's not necessarily the latest version, but it's definitely a version that is around during the release of a certain version of Liferay DXP. But then it changes over the years because some environments might go out of support. An old version of a database might go out of support from its vendor, and then typically it goes out of our support soon after that as well. Because after all, with DXP you're running with a supported version, and this supported version includes that you most likely want to run in a fully supported environment, well, on MySQL, on Oracle, on a supported version where the vendor gives you support as well. Setting up a simple stack. Here we are talking about a little bit more than just the Tomcat installation, because we run Liferay in Tomcat with the necessary dependencies. We'll talk about that very soon. We'll connect to a MySQL database. I told you I'll make the choice for you, and MySQL is this choice. And then we're going to also connect to Elasticsearch, to a repository, and LDAP services. Some of these will be exercises, some of them just will be mentioned. Talking about server security, which adds a couple of components to our environment. With our server security, what do we mean? We'll run with a proxy in front of Liferay or in front of Tomcat, which serves all of our web content before it hits the application server or the servlet container. First of all, we have an opportunity to just serve static content before it hits an application server. An application server typically has a hard time serving static content because it takes quite some resources. And if you deliver them from just classic web server or reverse proxy, that's a lot more efficient. And we'll also have an option to rewrite requests, so support content under old URLs where you might just want to add a redirect. And if you look at liferay.com and its evolution over the years, there is a couple of redirects that you will still find. If only, well, at the time of this recording, we are some weeks past the migration of the community site from a site called community.liferay.com to a site called liferay.dev. And guess what? All of the old URLs are still valid because we are running several redirects that will help you find all of the old forum posts under their new location. And that's the beauty of a reverse proxy in front of your Tomcat or in front of your application server. So that's the flexibility that allows us to have an evolution of our system. Plus, it also allows us to offload all of the TLS termination, all of the encryption of the connections, and several more. Now, when we look at this exercise, which is well prepared for you in the Liferay Tomcat folder of the download, then we'll first start by looking at the Docker files for our first instance, and here we'll learn a bit about Docker's syntax and Docker's description of how our image looks like. And then we're going to start this image that we built in its own container, and we'll be able to log in to the platform. So that will be very easy. You'll start up the Liferay instance. Here's the exercise. You'll find that in the written format. I won't go through that exercise in painstakingly detail, but I'll rather point you to the written exercise. If you run into any problems, please feel free to ask a question in the discussion also next to this or the next video. So please go in and look at the Docker Compose file, then look at the Docker file. We'll examine the MySQL service, which is very simple. We'll start up Liferay Tomcat 1 and then sign into Liferay. Now I want to give you some hints about the Docker file before I'll send you into the exercise. First of all, you have seen some Docker files in the chapter where we set up Docker. Those were the simple files that you just started. And a Docker file always starts with a from directive where you pick something from any of the Docker repositories. Now there you'll find a couple, well actually you'll find a lot of different Docker images to be based on or to base yourself on. And this is where the classic system administration comes into place, where the conservatism of the classic system administrator comes into place. They want to know every little bit that you'll find on your platform. Just because something is in the Docker repositories doesn't mean it's benign. So you'll have to make your choice. Which of the Docker images do you trust? Now, we have made some choice for you. These are very simple Docker images that we trust. And just be aware that you'll find a multitude of coin miners or cryptocurrency miners in the Docker Hub that look like something benign, and they will probably be benign plus mining cryptocurrency or whatever you find there. So this is something that we can't protect you from. It's just inherent to this environment. Be sure that you make your own choices wisely, based on reputation or based on known software that's in there, or have somebody just inspect the software. Now, if you look at the Docker Compose file in the upcoming exercise, there you'll find instructions on the different Docker images that we'll build and the different containers, how they are published, under which port numbers they are published. You'll find information about the volumes that they embed. Take look at the MySQL container, for example. It will have a volume where MySQL stores all of its data, because naturally you want the database to be persistent, even if the container is shut down. Same thing for the Tomcat. Same thing for the Tomcat container. Liferay Tomcat 1. Later on we'll have another one. That's why we have the number. We're going to cluster. So Liferay Tomcat 1 will have another volume in there, which is where Liferay stores its document library. That's something that we'll discuss later on. And then in the Docker file, there you will see how Liferay or how a Liferay Docker image is being built. So we are based on a relatively small image. This is Alpine Linux, which is the bare minimum that you can have, or an image that is designed to be as small as possible. And then on top of that, it has OpenJDK in one specific version. Sooner or later you want to update this. At the time of us recording this, I'm not quite sure if it's the latest available or not, but no, it is not. Okay. There is one comment. So this is something that we absolutely should update. This is the first way. And then we'll have a couple of settings here. And as we are running on a minimal installation, we are installing or we're updating a couple of components and also creating a couple of directories. We are going to run certain commands, and then we're going to copy files from our current host environment into the container. So these commands here basically help us to set up our image from files that we find outside. And here you will see we'll start with a downloaded bundle, and the bundle is, where do we have it, is just Liferay DXP GA1, which you can download from Liferay's Help Center if you're a customer, or which you may download as a trial unless there's a newer service pack. But after that, we'll have a couple more configuration commands. Several of them are prepared for later on, and as the very last line here, we'll have a command that we'll execute, and that's in the end the startup command for Tomcat. This is catalina.sh run, and this will start Tomcat. This process doesn't exit. Catalina run keeps the process running in the foreground, logging to standard out, and only when you shut down Tomcat manually, then this image will also stop, because this is what makes up the image. Remember, a Docker image or a Docker container is just a process, and this will be the process that is running. So that's the information on the Docker file, and let me also quickly open the Docker Compose file. Here you will have the various services, and we are looking for, let me scroll down a bit, we are looking for Liferay Tomcat 1 at the moment, and this is a file or an image that depends on MySQL, so we want to run only if MySQL is there. We're defining a network because containers can't talk to each other, but the MySQL image will have the same network configured. We will make our Tomcat port 8080 available on our host system on port 8081. And we'll also have another port in here, I'll discuss that later, which is our OSGI Gogo shell, and we have the volumes, and that's it. So this makes up the environment for our Liferay Tomcat 1 server, and you can inspect this and the various other containers that are prepared, for example, the MySQL container. And there's another directory for MySQL with its Docker file as well. I know I haven't given you a detailed overview over all of the commands that can go into a Docker file, but I hope that it's simple enough. Run, copy, command, and env or env. That should be more or less self-explanatory, so you will have an opportunity to read it, and this is how to turn a bundle into a running image. And of course, we're going to extend on that later on. Ready for the exercise? Ready, set, go. Once you have Liferay running, then you are running on port 8080, or in our host environment outside of Docker, we're mapping that port to 8081. Hint, hint, later on we're going to start a second server, and that will be on 8082, so that you know number 1 and number 2, you can determine which is which. Now, in order to map this environment to the proper HTTP port, port 80, we're going to run our reverse proxy, which is HA proxy, a very simple solution, which you can inspect. Everything is prepared for you. You can just inspect the configuration files and run HA proxy as well. So, in other words, go into the files that I have already shown you in the previous exercise. Look for HA proxy, which runs within the same network, maps port 80 and the management port 9999 to the runtime environment as well. And then you can also find the Docker file for HA proxy, which is very simple. Let me go in there, HA proxy, there's the Docker file. It's very simple. We'll just have HA proxy config, and let's look what's in this config. Here we just connect to our server, Liferay Tomcat 1, port 8080. That's basically it. All of the rest is, well, without going too deep into HA proxy, is relatively easy to understand. Now, if you wonder why I don't go into a deep explanation of HA proxy and of MySQL and of all of the other components, that's because this is Liferay DevOps training and not HA proxy DevOps training or MySQL DevOps training or other DevOps trainings. So we're going to simulate a new environment by giving you some hints. This is how you can run HA proxy in a very quick way. But if you actually want to run HA proxy in a production environment, then you may want to learn more about it. You can also run Apache, HTTPD, or Nginx, whatever suits you, whatever is available in your organization already is totally fine to run in this environment. Now, this should be very easy, and then with that, you should be able to run Liferay or to reach Liferay DXP on port 80. And one last remark, which is also because this is Liferay DevOps training and we're running on local host largely or on just the IP address of your local system, we are not going to deal with any TLS or HTTPS setup in this course because, again, this is the Liferay course and messing up certificates for localhost that are self-signed is just not a good thing to teach. So if you have a production system, of course you want to run with HTTPS. But that setup for HA proxy, for Apache, for Nginx is well documented elsewhere on the internet and not in Liferay DXP or not in Liferay DevOps training. Okay, with that, I'll let you go into this exercise as well. Running HA proxy should be very quick. Ready, set, go.